Michael, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you for reaching out and having me on.
You're obviously known as a filmmaker, at least to broader audience right now. But when people ask you what you do, if you met somebody on the street, how would you answer?
That's a good question, actually, because I don't like to think of myself as just a filmmaker. I think I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost, filmmaker, creative artist, second. But it's in my heart, it's my passion. I love to create things, but not just necessarily through film. I mean, you probably know that I started off doing music and production, music production as a rapper and as a producer, a hip hop beat maker, producer, and then it kind of evolved into me making music videos, and that evolved into me making YouTube documentaries, which evolved into me doing this documentary with Irv and Murder Inc. But that honestly, I don't think that could be limited. I don't like to limit myself by just filmmaker, because there's so many people out there who really study film and really go really, really hard on learning and understanding the craft. And I know the craft to a certain extent, but there's people out there who are way, way more versed and way more talented than I am. So I don't like to just call myself a filmmaker. I think I'm just a creative who, likes to paint with different tools,
I mean, you didn't study for film, as you said. You were studied for broadcast, on the broader level, right?
Radio and television broadcasting was my major. Becca, shout out to Becca.
That makes this story even crazier, frankly. And we're gonna get to that story about Murder Inc. and everything. But so what I wanted to start is hip hop in general, right? I'm a white kid immigrant. I don't know a lot about hip hop. So I wanted you to start. Tell me what's hip hop. How would you describe it to a person who've never heard about it?
It's a big thing to try to describe, because for so many people, it's a music genre. It's a genre of music. For some, it's a culture. For others, like myself, it's all of that, right? It's an ecosystem. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. Obviously, it started off as this kind of counterculture thing in the Bronx in the late 70s, early 80s, where a bunch of kids, who were shut out of opportunities as far as arts and music in schools. All those things were being stripped away here in the United States. And these kids kind of found the way through taking old break beats from these classic records that were already these R&B records or funk records. And they started, using two turntables and scratching, and then there's someone start talking over the beats, and that became emceeing or rapping. And then there's just this whole culture that came out of it. But for me, I'll say for me, it's a culture. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's about being disruptive. No matter what field or what your art form is, hip hop now is more than just a genre of music or just just a black thing or something that came from the inner city. It is a American export, is a uniquely American phenomenon that really brings out the creativity, the entrepreneurship, the disruptiveness in all of us. I think the internet, the internet that we live on today, in my opinion, is hip hop, just because there's people who take nothing and make something out of it. You take, a platform like YouTube or whatever, SoundCloud or whatever, and you fill that up with content, and now you can create a whole new, stream of revenue for yourself. And it's literally taking nothing and making something out of it. And that's, to me, what hip hop is the ability to take, a little bit of creativity and turn it into something not only that's fulfilling to you, personally and emotionally, but also something that can also create economic opportunity and cross-cultural barriers and all these things. So to me, that's what hip hop is. It's my long-winded way of saying that.
To the extent it's almost like American dream for people who never had the opportunities in the first place.
Absolutely. It is kind of the hack of the American dream for those of us who were, for our communities who were shut out of the American dream historically. That what I always say, I know we'll get to Murder Inc. and Irv in a little bit, but just to kind of paint the picture, I always say that, Irv Gotti was 12 years old, 12 or 13 years old when he learned how to DJ on his friends' parents' turntables. And there to be a young kid, 12, 13 years old, to learn how to master a technology. People forget, I think we take it for granted now because it's everywhere. And we all see the two turntables and we think that's just natural, but that's some complicated technology to learn how to master. So imagine, and he took that and he turned it into a multi-million-dollar, career for himself, for his family, for all the others around him. So imagine if, how old was Bill Gates or Steve Jobs when they were in their parents' garage playing with computer motherboards, So imagine if someone had put a motherboard in front of Irv Gotti instead of a turntable. Just his genius and his ability to master technology. He could have created Apple. He could have created, so it's, to me, yes, that is what hip hop is. It kind of bridges that gap and allows people who would never ever have a chance to thrive economically or to get their ideas or their innovations out to actually have a platform to do that.
This obviously the kind of mature way of looking at hip hop. But how were you introduced to hip hop growing up? It wasn't this view of it, right? It probably was more of through some artists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was. Ironically, the thing that got me. Just growing up, you always hear hip hop and you always hear the music around, and it almost comes naturally. But when I became really, really interested in the genre and the culture and wanting to actually be a part of it and immerse myself in it, there's really two people I can look at and say they're absolutely the reason why I got into it. And those two people are Irv Gotti and Jay-Z. And that's unequivocal. Like that is, later it evolved and more people became a part of that. But that what really got me interested was, at a young age, I was a big Ja Rule fan. I just loved Ja Rule and Ashanti, and I loved the music that they were making. And I thought Ja Rule was the coolest person in the world. And Ja is really one of the coolest guys to ever walk the planet. He's super cool, man. But growing up, I just wanted, I wanted to be like Ja. I loved his music. And so as a fan, you just study everything. You're reading the liner notes, you're reading, for the kids who don't know about the album book covers back in the days, you had to get the CD, open it up, and there was a booklet in there that had, every song and who produced it and all that. So I was starting to see this name, Irv Gotti, and executive producer, and all this. And I remember that maybe the summer of 2002, Irv Murder Inc. released a compilation album called Irv Gotti Presents the Inc. And it was basically a compilation album of all of Murder Inc.'s artists. It was Ja Rule, Ashanti, but it was all the other artists who were on the label, Vita, Charlie Baltimore, and Black Child, so forth. And I just became even more fascinated. Again, remember, I'm 12 years old, and I'm like, well, why is this Irv Gotti guy so important? He just, his name keeps popping up. And I, after really doing my research, I realized that he was not only the producer of all these records, but also the label owner and kind of the boss. And I just became intrigued, like, well, who can be the boss of Ja Rule? Like, Ja Rule is so cool. How can he have a boss? And so I just went down the rabbit hole and just started, learning about, what it means to own a label and be a producer. And that's what really got me into being interested in becoming, an artist, but not only an artist, but also someone who was, behind the scenes and could produce. And at 12 or 13 years old, I think I started making my own little records on my computer, and I was putting them out on CDs and going around selling them. And that was my introduction to the game. And, later, shortly thereafter, I started really getting into Jay-Z, because Jay-Z was another artist, but he also was always, he was becoming more of a businessman and showing his entrepreneurial skills. And so that really interested me as well. I thought his music was cool. So I just started studying everything about Jay-Z and you know, Rockefeller and where they came from and how they built their label from the ground up. And that, you know, all that ultimately helped to shape the foundation of me getting into hip hop myself as a you know, as an artist, as a person who, you know, just immersed in it.
What were you growing up? East Coast or West Coast?
I grew up on the West Coast. I was born and raised in Oakland, California. So completely, you know, I always get a lot of questions about, you know, well, were you from the, you know, New York, or did you ever grow up in New York? And no, not at all. I was a West Coast, you know, Bay Area kid. And obviously we grew up around Too Short and E40 and Mac Dre and, you know, these very Bay Area centric things. But again, growing up, and remember for the kids watching, there wasn't the internet. I mean, the internet was like dial up and AOL, and it was slow. Like there was no Twitter or social media. I mean, we used to go in chat rooms and stuff. That was like our thing back then. So the internet wasn't a thing. The only thing that really that kind of introduced you to the world outside of where you were was TV, you know, magazines, and, you know, the radio. And all these things at the time, the music industry was very concentrated, especially in the early 2000s, in New York. Everything was very New York centric, and all the magazines, you know, The Source, Double XL, Vibe magazine, they all were kind of based in New York. The record labels, Def Jam and Rockefeller, Murder Inc., all these all were based in New York. The TV shows that came on MTV or BET, all in New York. So you know, when I was studying the business of music, a lot of the information that I came from the East Coast and came from New York. And then I started getting more into East Coast artists. So obviously from Ja Rule, Irv Gotti, and Jay-Z, it grew into learning about Nas, learning about Wu-Tang Clan, learning about, you know, all these, you know, East Coast centric New York artists that were, you know, that the people weren't necessarily playing those guys where I grew up at, but that's because New York to me was the mecca of hip hop. That's what I really studied. So that's how I became so enamored with the whole New York rap scene, even though I was from the Bay Area.
I'm just thinking like about it. Like if you were born like maybe a decade earlier, you would be in this cross of West Coast, East Side, West Side type of I don't know whether it was real conflict or something, but you by default probably would be gravitated towards West Coast, right? You wouldn't be able to think of Jay-Z the way you were thinking of him right
Yeah,
now.
you know, I think I caught the end of that whole East Coast, West Coast thing. So I started to come, you know, involved in thinking about hip hop seriously around, you know, 2001, 2002. And yeah, I think that's only what 4 or 5 years removed from when Biggie Smalls got murdered in 97 and Tupac was murdered in 96. So it was still very fresh at the time. Even when I was studying the game, you know, studying the hip hop game, it was very much taboo for a West Coast artist to want to sound like an East Coast artist and vice versa. It was still kind of, it wasn't as strong. Obviously, it's probably the tensions were back in the 90s, but it was very much taboo because, you know, on the East Coast, they didn't really play West Coast artists. You know, that was a big thing. Like on the East Coast radio, they didn't play, you know, unless it was like Snoop Dogg or Dr. Dre, they didn't really play West Coast artists. And I can't say vice versa because in the West Coast, they play, you know, we play everything, but it was still very strong. And so it was always kind of, well, I was too young to know if it was controversial or not, but I always kind of understood that me being from the West Coast would probably be a conflict, you know, just because if I wanted to break into the business on the East Coast. So from an early age, I always felt like I needed to move to New York. So from the time I was, you know, 11 or 12, I was always trying to get to New York. When I started making music, I was making demo tapes and I was sending, you know, not tapes, but CDs. I would make the demo CDs, put 4 or 5 songs on those CDs, and I would mail them off. I remember I would get the album covers and look on the back and see what the address of the labels were. So I was sending all my music to Def Jam Interscope and all these East Coast record labels, because I felt like I had to get to the East Coast in order to become successful in the music business. But yeah, it was a real it was definitely a thought, because it was still pretty fresh in the early 2000s, but eventually that went away with social media and all that stuff. But yeah, it was definitely a real thing.
I think that fascination with Jay-Z and Murder Inc. is what caused you to create this unauthorized documentary, right? And you put it on YouTube, and it went viral. And Irv contacted you, right? Is it fair?
Yeah, that's correct.
What did he say? Like, how did that unravel?
So when Irv put up a post on Instagram, and
When was it?
this was, just to give some context, it was I made this documentary, the unauthorized documentary, and I published it, I should say, in October of 2018. I made it in my NYU. I was going to NYU at the time for grad school, and I made it in my dorm room. It was like the first thing I did when I finally moved to New York later on in life, and I going to grad school, and when I got to New York in my dorm, I posted up and I made this unauthorized documentary. Maybe the first month of me being in New York, this is what I did. That's all I did. I would go to class, and I would come back home, and I would just work on this piece. So I put it up in October, and I think it was out for several months. I remember it was March of 2019. And I remember so vividly, because that's also the year, the month that my mother passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. And I remember the day when Irv contacted me was the exact day that I buried my mom.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, that was crazy. I mean, I remember it was I had a whole burial that morning. It was me and some family, and I'm an only child. So to have to deal with losing your mother, who was like my rock, that was a devastating thing. So I was just all torn up. I thought life was over, but me kind of being just the person I am, I was like, let me put one foot in front of the other and just try to move on with life. And so I got me and a bunch of my cousins that night. I said, hey, let's go to the movies. Let's just, try to relax. I know it's a tough time for everybody, but let's, we got to just put one foot in front of the other and try to be, strong. That's what my mom would want. And so we go to see the movie Us, the Jordan Peele movie, Us.
Yep.
Yeah. So as I'm sitting down with my popcorn in my hand, my phone is just going crazy. My Instagram is going crazy, and folks are saying, tagging me, saying Irv Gotti is looking for you. Irv Gotti is looking for you. I'm just thinking it's some kind of joke, or I've been hacked or something. But I click on Irv's page, and there's this post saying, if anybody knows this Michael Payton guy, he made an unauthorized documentary about me and Murder Inc. Find him, put him in touch with me. I want to work with him. He did an incredible job. And I was just like, this was like amazing, because Irv, again, is one of the reasons why I ever got into the business. I had never met Irv. I never had any kind of interaction. I never talked to him or anything prior to that. So this was like, I was in like a dream or the Twilight Zone or something. And sure enough, we connected on social media that day. And ironically, he was at the movies watching Us at the exact same time I was in the movies watching. He was in down in LA or something. I was up in the Bay Area. But we spoke briefly on Instagram. Then the next day we had a full conversation on the phone, and the rest is history.
This is nuts. So basically, you told him that you've never shot a documentary, and he said, but you still can shot official documentary on him. Is it the story?
Yeah, well, I've directed things before. So while I was at SF State and kind of in the later parts of my college career, I really became more and more um, involved in doing like film.
Mm-hmm.
I started directing my music videos as an artist, and then that kind of evolved into me doing videos for other artists, local artists, and I became really handy with the camera and video editing. So I started shooting videos, and I would start shooting little content and series. And I've shot documentaries before, but they were, obviously on a much smaller scale. But I've done, and I started doing these unauthorized documentaries around just about people I found interesting. I did one on Hillary Clinton. I did one on Jay-Z. I did one on Will Smith. I did several of these documentaries before I actually did, the Irv Gotti thing. But when when we spoke, I had never done a network TV full length documentary before. And the conversation actually wasn't that was going to direct it. It was more like, hey, I want you to come and work with me and be, just be a part of the team that's going to make the official documentary. Because he was thinking about making a documentary, but he just hadn't quite had the team together. But he had the idea that maybe he would have Hype Williams, very popular music video director, or some of the other somebody else, a bigger name director, do it, and then I kind of work under that director as either producer or just I don't know, just help out any way I can. He just thought it was good to have me a part of the team. But then when obviously I flew back to California for my mother's funeral and her service. Then I flew back to New York to finish out my semester at NYU, New York University. And that's when me and Irv, even though Irv, this is complicated, but Irv lives in LA, but he also has a place in, he lives,
Mm-hmm.
he's from New York, he lives in New York, he lives all over. So at the time when I flew back to New York, it was also when he was back in New York at that time. So we ended up meeting up officially in New York. And, we just got to talking and spending a lot of time together. And he was telling me more about the story. I told him more about my background and things that I wanted to do, and just my knowledge of hip hop. And once he kind of got the idea, like, oh, this kid really knows his stuff. Like, not only does he know, my story so well and the Murder Inc. story so well, because that was one of the things that really fascinated him. He was like, well, how did you know? Because I had never met him. He had never had a conversation with me or anything. She's like, how do you know such intricate details of this story? And I'm like, I just did my research. And, also me being a student of hip hop, I know so many, I kind of know this story like the back of my hand. Not just the Murder Inc. story, but Def Jam and Rockefeller and Bad Boy, with Diddy. I mean, I just know that whole world so well. And he was really fascinated by my knowledge. And he was like, you know what? I want you to direct the whole thing. You just direct the whole thing. And that's when I was like, wow, that's a huge opportunity, because I've never directed a TV show or a movie of that scale before. So, but I took on the challenge with no hesitation.
That's fascinating. I actually subscribed to BET just to watch this thing,
Oh,
and it's
man.
fascinating to me because I didn't know story obviously, but the way it's told, it's awesome. Like, if people
Thank
haven't watched them, they should go and check it out. I really enjoyed it. So
thank
walk me through the full process from the beginning. Did you create a script and then showed him and asked him who would be the good guests to interview for this, or what's the whole process like?
So I ended up spending a lot of time with Irv in the beginning. You remember, this is the early part of 2019.
Mhm.
So this is before the pandemic and everything. So for the rest of that year, I spent a lot of time with Irv, getting to know him, meeting his family. I met Ja Rule. I met a lot of people in Murder Inc. who are part of Murder Inc. I got to get everyone's stories. He really ultimately was giving me, his story as he knew it, and he wanted to allow me to kind of just tell the story the way that I saw fit. And so I did a lot of research in between that time, and I wrote the treatment and I guess the script, as you would call it, for the documentary, like how I want to play out from the beginning and who all will be involved. Those are all things that I put together, obviously with some input from him. He's like, oh, you might want to check out this person who knows this part about this story. You might want, but ultimately most of the guests were all just things that I thought of, like, well, Charlamagne Tha God would be a good person to interview, or obviously there's some people who are obvious like Jay-Z, and those guys like that are very obvious because they were such an intricate part of his story. But even the folks that may not be so obvious to give that context, those are all things that that I have pieced together very, very early on in the process, back in 2019, and before we even got to production and all the way in 2022.
Who reached out to these people? You or Irv or BET? And how did they agree to be part of this?
It was a mixture of both. I mean, in the beginning, we, us being, just hip hop guys, we just started shooting stuff before we even had a deal. We just started, Irv, myself, one of our producers, Tom Fanning. We just said, you know what? Before we don't even have a deal yet, but we have, we know what the story we want to tell. We want to fast track this thing. Let's just start interviewing folks. So we, at first it was kind of Irv making some introductions. One of the first set of folks I interviewed was obviously Irv's family. I interviewed a lot of Irv's family.
Yep.
Then interviewed Angie Martinez, who legendary New York City radio personality. I interviewed her in the very, very beginning, which is also mind blowing for me. For those who don't know Angie Martinez, she is, basically we call her like the Oprah Winfrey of hip hop culture. Like, she is just that important. And so for me and I grew up, again, as a kid on the West Coast, listening to New York podcasts and all that stuff. Angie was a big inspiration for me to know how to interview. And so me doing that was a big, big full circle moment for me. But that's one of the first interviews that we got. And then we're starting to shoot, and let me not get ahead of myself. But yes, basically Irv in the beginning was reaching out to folks. He would give me and our producer, Tom Fanning, people's contacts, say, hey, reach out to our lawyer, reach out to this person. And, but so we got a handful of interviews in the beginning of the process. Then once we actually got to BT some 3 years later, or 2 or 3 years later, we hired a booking agent, and we would reach out to certain folks. I would reach out. It was a big team effort. I would reach out to a lot of people. Obviously folks like Jay-Z, Irv reached out to directly. But yeah, it was a kind of a mixture at that point.
I know that Ashanti, you reached out to Ashanti and she wasn't available. Were there any other people who were not available, but you really wanted them to be part of this?
Yeah. Well, Ashanti was a big piece because she's a huge part of Murder Inc. And she, it wasn't necessarily that she was unavailable. She just did not want to participate because
I just wanted to be nice. Yeah.
But no. Let's keep it real though. She obviously her and Irv Gotti have had some, a not so great relationship over the years. But I reached out to Ashanti personally, or to her management personally, and tried to kind of be the bridge and say, hey, listen, we're doing this unbiasedly. We want to tell the story in a real way that's not slated towards one side. I want to give you your opportunity to speak. And I think just the proximity, I guess, maybe to me and Irv, my story about Irv already started kind of getting out there in the universe. So maybe they kind of figured I was too close, or that they just didn't want to be a part of the situation. So that was a big one. Another one that I really wish that we had got was another New York radio DJ, Funkmaster Flex, who was a big part of, if you watch the first episode of the documentary, you'll see that how big of a part that he played in Irv's career, and helping to break Jay-Z and helping to break some of those first Murder Inc. records. But for some reason, we couldn't get him. We were in New York for a couple of weeks. And he's based in New York. He does a radio show in New York every night on the radio. And Irv gave me his number. I was reaching out to him. Irv reached out to him, and for some reason we never could make it happen. I'm not really sure why. So that was one. Those are probably the two biggest interviews that we didn't get that I wish that we would have got. But honestly, with the bigger exception being Ashanti, because she's a bigger part of the story. Other than that, I mean, we got everybody else that we wanted.
Yeah, but for people who don't know, it was Ja Rule, Jay-Z, Nas, Fat Joe, Charlamagne Tha God. It's just like holy shit. Like for you, person who grew up watching these people, being in the same room with them, meeting them, interviewing, like what were like on a scale from 1 to 10, how blown away were you?
Oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, about 15. It was amazing. Yeah, it was off the chain. It was off the chain. It was, you know, to first, you know, meet Ja Rule was amazing, was huge. You know, if it wasn't for Ja and Murder Inc., I would not even be interested in hip hop, probably, you know. And so I remember the first time meeting Ja Rule, we you know, we met at Irv's house, and we just end up just literally just me and Ja Rule. We just end up driving to like Bossa Nova. And for those who don't know, Bossa Nova is a great like restaurant here in LA. And we just talked for hours, you know, and that was like, just, I can't tell you how much that meant to me, you know. It's just literally me and Ja Rule in the car, just talking about the music business and all this. So that was mind blowing already. And then, I mean, all these guys, Nas, Jay-Z obviously holds a very special place because, you know, not only did I, you know, grow up and learn about the business through Jay-Z, but, you know, also was put through college through Jay-Z's foundation.
Tell this story, because I saw that Jay-Z was showing the video of you to his mom, right? He basically saying, "Hey, look, mom, this is the guy we put through college," right? Tell me this story.
Yeah, no. So Jay, you know, obviously doing my research and always being just a Jay-Z fan, I found out, I don't know how, but at a young age, I found out that he had a scholarship foundation. So when it was time for me to, you know, apply to college, when I was doing like, you know, my financial aid, I just started writing letters to everyone I can try to get a scholarship from. And obviously top of that list was the Sean Carter Foundation. They made a huge contribution to my you know, education, and they saw me all through my undergraduate education at SF State. And so, you know, I honestly can say if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't probably be who I am today. And so, you know, for now, I mean, think about how big that is for someone you idolize as a kid to help put you through school. That gave me a huge sense of pride and purpose. And then, you know, to all these years later, to be in that room with Jay-Z and to be interviewing him for this documentary that he's partly responsible for, you know, was completely mind blowing. I went to Jay-Z's office here in LA, and it was really just me, him, my camera guy, and our executive producer, Darcel. It was just like 4 of us in the room. But it was just me and him talking just like this for, you know, 45 minutes to an hour. And I mean, that was amazing. But the first thing I did when I met him, after I picked my job off the floor, I was I just said thank you. And, you know, of course he was like, you know, yeah, of course, I'm glad to do the interview. Is, you know, I'm like, no, Jay, I don't think you understand. Thank you, because I'm here because of you. You put me through college. And, you know, he just lit up from there. And after our interview, he put me on the phone with his mom, that video that you're talking about. And, you know, he FaceTimed his mom, Honorable Dr. Lyor Cohen, who, you know, runs his foundation. And so, you know, we were all just sitting there, all 3 of us on the phone, you know, on that phone, and just all in amazement. Because, you know, I think a lot of people think that, you know, especially celebrities, they have these charities or these foundations, and they, you know, sometimes people never really see the impact. Even the celebrities themselves, they just kind of give this money away. They don't necessarily always see where it goes or how it's being used. So for me to end up back in Jay-Z's office that day, you know, through Irv, who was someone who he also had a, you know, they both played big roles in each other's careers, and they're like family now. they're like brothers. And for me to be there in his office that day, I think it just meant a lot for all of us because, obviously Jay has seen a lot of things in his life, but, I think that was a point of pride. And for his mother, for me to meet, Dr. Carter was amazing. And that was, highlight of my life, one of the highlights of my life. And shortly after, we went our separate ways, but a few days later, our executive producer Darcel calls me and says that Jay-Z asked for my number to give to his mother, and so
you should have said no. Just
she did the opposite of. She said, "Michael, I gave him your number, your address, your social security number, your blood. I gave him everything." I was like, "All right, Darcel," but also, you sometimes. You also don't know what to expect, right? Sometimes people say things, "Oh yeah, we'd love to talk to him again," but you never. But then a few days after that, I get a call from Jay-Z's mom, and she calls and says and asks me to come and speak to a group of her students, her current students. Every year, the Sean Carter Foundation does this bus tour for historically Black colleges for new and incoming students. So because of the pandemic, they had to do it virtually. So there was an opportunity for me to come on virtually and speak to the kids and give them my story and some words of encouragement. And so that was very fulfilling for me. And I really appreciate that. And I thought if it stops there, that's fine. But from there, they, the Sean Carter Foundation and his, and Dr. Carter have asked me to continue on doing a number of projects with them. And so I've been currently working with them on some stuff, a lot of stuff actually that.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's all just an amazing story, man.
So we covered. You talked Ja Rule, you talked to Jay-Z, Nas. How did you meet him, and like, what went through your mind when you were talking to him?
To Nas,
Yeah.
Nas, oh my God! I mean, Nas it's not maybe. Nas is definitely top 5 of my favorite artists of all time. So again, it was another one of those like, holy shit, I don't know if we can curse, but holy, crap.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here talking to Nas, and that was incredible. That was incredible. Nas is so cool. He's like the coolest guy, the most, laid back guy. And that was another proud moment for me, just because I grew up, again, being from the West Coast, and you start learning about these important guys from New York that you have to, study and know about their music and their work. So I went back and did the research on Nas and listened to his first album, Illmatic, which is a hip hop classic, and listened to It Was Written and study all of his material. And so he was a big factor in me, learning how to be a better lyricist and an artist, and just the stories he told, the way he tells stories is so just so vivid, and that he's one of the greatest of all time. So that was a big moment for me as well.
One interesting thing from the documentary is like, I remember Irv said that because we started working with Nas, Jay-Z took offense, right? It was the story, but yet here's a documentary, and they both in there. And are they chill now? Are they good now? What's going on between them?
Yeah. So at the time in the early 2000s, Jay-Z and Nas were rivals. They had kind of got locked into this hip hop war of words, and it was one of the biggest. I mean, it's right up there with like Biggie and Tupac is like one of the biggest hip hop rivalries of all time. So Irv Gotti was obviously influential in Jay-Z's career and vice versa. And with Nas, both Nas and Irv Gotti are from Queens, New York. They're from the same neighborhood. Jay-Z's from Brooklyn, New York. But so with them being both from the same neighborhood, Irv saw an opportunity to kind of, and they're both at the peak of their careers at this time. And so Irv saw an opportunity to, do something really big and do a collaboration where it's, Murder Inc. and Nas and Ja Rule, they're all from Queens, New York. And so he just wanted to do something big and ambitious with some of the biggest artists from Queens, kind of ignoring the fact that his best friend Jay-Z is locked in this beef with this guy. and that kind of at the time it was a really deeply personal beef between Jay-Z and Nas. And so I think when Irv Gotti did that, when he aligned himself with Nas, that made Jay-Z feel like, okay, he's kind of turned his back on me, and therefore it kind of fractured Jay-Z and Irv Gotti's relationship for a minute. But now, all these years later, Jay-Z and Nas are like they're great, they're good friends. They've squashed all their controversy, and so they're all in a good place now. So they both men talked about it, and they were almost laughing about it now because it was old and they were young. But yeah, it was so interesting. I mean, you have both of them in there and talking about that. I mean, it was like, it's again very, very mind blowing as a hip hop student of hip hop, for someone to know how deeply rooted that beef was, and for them to both be participating in this documentary was like, this is gold right here.
There are a few more characters there who are interesting, like Fat Joe. First of all, he's in pretty good shape. He should change his name. Because he's a great guy. So his interview, like he looked to be, he's very different in these interviews that I pictured him.
Yeah.
Like, what can you tell about him?
Fat Joe is probably the in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion, but I say this, I think it's Irv Gotti and Fat Joe are two of the greatest storytellers in hip hop. Just, it's something about when they get on the camera or when they talk to you, they paint these very vivid stories. Like, they can tell you these things that happened, and they'll tell you an old story from the road or an old story from, something that happened, and it's so intriguing. And so with Fat Joe, I mean, his interview was, one of my favorites because he was able to tell things that, you never heard before. You never heard these stories before. And he is just so entertaining. And he's one, I mean, again, another legend. He's another legend, been in the game since, before I was even born. And so just to have his perspective in there, I mean, he's one of the voices of hip hop. Now he's also a media personality now, doing his own podcast. So just to have his lens as someone who, made records with Murder Inc., but also someone who is also kind of a cultural gatekeeper, a cultural, someone who looks at the culture from a bigger perspective. He was able to give a really interesting and unique look at the whole story. And so that was amazing to talk to Joe.
At some point, you guys start talking about Ja Rule's and his song New York.
Yeah.
And he said it actually was my song. And I think
Yeah.
you asked, like, really? Somebody who was interested was surprised. What was surprised about? Is it that the fact that it was presented more of a Ja Rule song, or why was the person confused?
Yeah, that was me in the background saying,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
really? Yeah, because I knew that Fat Joe's producers, Cool and Dre, they're the producers that worked really close with Fat Joe at the time. They produced the song New York for Ja Rule, and I knew that they had a big hand in helping to make that record, but I didn't know that it was the way Fat Joe had phrased it was that he said New York was my record at first, and that's why it was kind of shocking. I was like, I didn't know that. Like, so I didn't. Do you mean that the whole record was yours, and you kind of so that was kind of, it was interesting to me because I didn't know that it was. I know they made the beat, but I didn't know that it was literally like your record. So that kind of threw me off. So I was really like, really? What? Yeah. That was big news for me. Yeah.
Charlamagne Tha God. I know him. I've seen his interview, and he's amazing. I love how when he talks to politicians, he basically calls them up on their bullshit.
Yeah.
I love it. What is his role in all this? Was he like a DJ or the guy who's like knows the insider story? Why did you pick him?
Charlamagne is like you said, he interviews everybody. His show, The Breakfast Club, is I think one of the top, the highest rated, radio show in all of hip hop, one of the highest rated shows in America. And he's like, just a very, very, very much a staple in hip hop culture and in the media. And so for Charlamagne, he was he was around during the Murder Inc. run. He was meaning that he was in radio. He was working in the business, but he wasn't obviously who he is today. So his participation in the doc wasn't about like, oh, you were here and you were someone who helped to break Murder Inc. It was more or less him being a cultural critic, and him, because he is so he'll call you out on your bullshit. He will call you out and speak from a non-biased perspective. And so what I wanted was someone who had that kind of lens and that kind of pull in the culture, and could sit there, because obviously you get, Irv Gotti's side and you get Murder Inc. side, and you hear one side. What I wanted to be, and especially because we did not have like Ashanti, who would obviously have a different, perspective on some things as Irv and Murder Inc. would have. So one of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that it was not a very biased, or we wanted to balance out that some of the biases that may come. And so with Charlamagne, who is a student as well, and also someone who knows the culture in and out, he's able to give that perspective and say, well, this is what Murder Inc. meant to the culture back then. This is what, when radio played Ja Rule's records, this is why it was important, why it was significant. When the 50 Cent and Murder Inc. beef was going on, this is why, this is the big picture, if you will. This is the big picture, and this is why people took sides with 50 Cent, and just things like that. He was able to speak from a position that wasn't on either side. It was just someone who was like a fan, really in a cultural critic. So, and he did that very, very, very well. I mean, he said some things that I think probably may have ruffled some feathers. I mean, especially when it came to Ashanti, he was very honest that he, in his opinion, he felt like, Ashanti was right to want her, to own the rights to her music because of everything that happened between her and Irv. And so that's obviously not a opinion that Irv would have took, but that's why we wanted him in the doc to give, a full view of the story.
Did Irv approve this stuff, or like did you guys have some disagreements when he actually saw that there are sort of narratives that didn't match what he would like to put out there?
No, I mean, at least from my perspective, there was never a approval process with Irv. Like, I could have probably got like the high school bully that that used to beat him up or something. Not that he ever got beat up. I'm just saying, but like, I could have got any, and it's all fair game, because at the end of the day, I mean, even when it comes to Jay-Z, and I mean, really everybody, but I think Jay-Z is a very significant one. I mean, he was very honest about, and I don't know how much of this actually made it to the final cut, but we got some of it in there. But Jay-Z was very, very candid and very open about some of Irv's shortcomings. And I think a lot of people were, from Nas to Lyor Cohen, who is, one of Irv's mentors. Like, everyone was very much open about, like, yeah, Irv is a genius and Irv is brilliant. He had all this success, but these were his downfalls. And this is why certain things weren't as successful as they could have been, because he stuck his foot in his mouth, or because he made this move. And it was very, yeah, very, very nuanced. And yeah, people didn't hold back. I mean, some people may have like tried to be a little reserved, but for the most part, especially like those big players like, Jay-Z, Nas, Lyor Cohen, Kevin Liles, Steve Stout, those guys were very, very honest about their opinions of Irv. And I think Irv, when he first tapped me to do this, he wanted me to be honest. He wanted me to tell an honest story and to paint the full picture. He's like, if someone says, fuck Irv Gotti, then keep that in there. Don't take anything out, because he wanted to be honest and truthful. So I think we accomplished that.
It's funny that you brought up Lyor. He was the last person I wanted to talk about. He's one of the white kids in this whole video, and he's fairly white for the guy who's in hip hop, and he played quite big role there, right? With the Murder Inc. As you said, he was a mentor to Irv. What's his role there? Like, what kind of influences he had back in the day, and maybe now too?
Lyor Cohen is, I mean, he ran Def Jam. He was the I don't know what his exact title was, president or owner. I don't know, but he was an executive, a very high level executive at Def Jam Records back in the '90s and early 2000s. That helps usher in the Irv Gottis and the Rockefellers and the Rough Riders with DMX. He was kind of the maestro behind all that, and Lyor is, he's a Jewish, white man who, people kind of paint as this, people have a lot of controversial things they say about him because he's, why is this white guy have an opinion on hip hop? But he came up being Run DMC's manager. A road manager. He was the road manager for Run DMC, the legendary hip hop group. And so he really started on the ground floor of hip hop and really rose through the ranks at Def Jam and became very influential in the culture. And he was Irv's mentor at one point early on in Irv's career, and was a big reason why. Well, he's part of the reason why Irv got his record deal for Murder Inc. at Def Jam. Irv is one of the reasons why Def Jam was able to stay afloat in the late '90s, because he brought to the table Jay-Z, Ja Rule, DMX. He brought these folks to Def Jam and helped them, see a big level of success. So they played a big role in each other's stories. So again, he was one of those stories that we had to have as part of this, because he played such a big role in Murder Inc.
Interesting. So what did you learn about the industry that you've studied previously? What did you learn during that process that you didn't know prior to that?
Oh man, it really just affirmed a lot of things that I thought I knew. But I think what I really learned was just how lightning in the bottle this particular time period was, how unique it was, right? Like how unique it was to have, at this time, the late '90s, early 2000s, to have Murder Inc., Rockefeller, Def Jam, all these guys come up under the same roof, under the same umbrella, and to have that kind of success, for young Black artists and entrepreneurs. It was a very, very unique time. And I think for me, I just learned how unique that time really was, because I think at some point when I was studying it, I just took it for granted that this is the way the business is, and this is like, of course, this is how it works. But no, it was such a, and of course, everything was always going to be that successful, but it's not. Like, if you look at the music business today, the kind of money that's flowing through is not the same money that was flowing through 20 years ago. Like, they were getting a lot of money, a lot. I mean, some would say too much money for guys that young. Like, how do you even know what to do with all this success? So I think I really learned just from that perspective, just how unique and how, like, that time was really, really special, not only for hip hop, but for the music business in general. This is, again, like the last era of the physical music product, like, so from, selling CDs to now MP3s, like this was the last of that time period, and with CDs being, the main driver of music sales, this is why it was so lucrative, because you can make a copy of a CD for, pennies on the dollar, and then sell it for $20. And now you're making, I mean, think if you sell 1 million copies of something at $20 each, you do the numbers. I mean, and then you're doing this times, 100 for all these art. I mean, that's it's just incredible amount of money. And then with MP3s and the internet and Napster and all that stuff, and now streaming where we are today, it's just that money is not, it's not the same. It's not the business is not the same at all. So that's something I really took away from just interviewing all these folks, is that, and it's funny also how many of these people are not in the music business anymore. Even from Lyor Cohen, who is, technically he's still a part of music in some way. He founded 300 Entertainment, which is this, big hip hop music label that has, Meg Thee Stallion and Young Thug and a lot of these other artists. But, now Lyor Cohen is now the head of global music at Google and YouTube. Kevin Liles he still runs 300, the music label, but it's like music has now become this big a part of their portfolio because it's not as lucrative anymore. You know, Jay-Z is Jay-Z, but he has 100 businesses. He's no longer like just in the music business. So same with Irv. I mean, Irv is now literally making movies and TV. And so I really learned that was a very, very special and unique time of the music business. And probably the last like really like probably the last golden era of the music business, because it was so much money, and now it's just not that kind of money in there at all.
I've spoken with one uh, rock musician, and he told me the same thing. He said, back in the day, they would make money off the CDs, and now they make money off the touring. So
Yeah.
that's kind of that's how the
Merchandise, touring, yeah.
dynamic change. Yeah. So tell me about the players in the hip hop industry now. Like who are the most powerful labels and who are the most powerful people? And some of them we probably never heard about.
Yeah, that's, it's hard to say because well, I'll say like QC, quality control, who is instrumental behind like the Migos, Cardi B, um a lot of folks like that. It's really hard to say because what's happened, now is that the music business has become a lot more democratized, if you will. Back in the days, there was what, 3 or 4, maybe 5 major labels. Even though you had Def Jam and you had all these things, it was most of the labels all ran under like the few big majors. It was, Universal. I might be getting this, but like Interscope and Warner Music. It was like very few like major record labels, and they all kind of controlled everything. And now because of the internet, you don't really need a label as much as you used to. So you have a lot of people who are just kind of doing things on their own. You have a lot of people who have their own independent labels and doing things. So it's really hard to say who are the power players. But like I said, I know QC is a big one. I mean, Jay-Z and Roc Nation, his company now still hold a really, really dominant hold on the industry, just through managing different artists, and not only artists but athletes and personality. So they've expanded their palette. God, who else is a big or big? It's a few, but it's still not that many. Major players, because honestly, again, the music business just isn't what it used to be. So people are finding out really artists now are their own kind of big players. They're doing a lot of the work that a label or a manager or a boss would have done 20 years ago. So it's kind of hard to say, but the music business is so different because everyone is spread out.
What you just said, it's in line with what you said in documentary about Nipsey Hussle, right, where he did everything by himself.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
Yeah, no, that's really the new model. That's really the new, and at the time of Irv Gotti, Irv is also one of those people who is very much a do it myself type of guy, and he'll take the label, the money from the label, but then he's going to go out and work the records himself. He's going to go out and shoot the videos himself. And that was, at the time, was very, very innovative. People weren't doing that. People were just kind of relying on the machine to do everything for them. But Irv kind of was a pioneer in that space, and that he was, even though he had a deal and he had a major label behind him, he was still doing a lot of the work. And now that's kind of become the norm instead of the exception in the music business, because before you even get signed to a label now, you kind of already have to have your own thing working. Mm-hmm. You have to already have had songs played on the radio, or be on all these playlists on Spotify, or have music videos. You have touring already in play. Like you have to be an entrepreneur and a independent artist before you even can get a major deal. Then the artists that are successful are like, well, why do I need a major label if I'm doing all the work myself? I'm not going to cut them into my money. So that's why you're seeing a lot of labels go away. Drake. We talked about big players. Drake and his team maybe one of the very last of those major artists who are signed to like labels. And the minute that Drake leaves his major label deal and then goes independent, it's probably over for the music business, because like there's that's you know, he's probably one of the biggest artists in the world, and so you know, if he takes that jump, everyone's gonna follow.
Who's he signed to?
I think he's Universal Republic.
Universal. Got it.
Yeah, Universal.
So Drake, you said he's one of the biggest artists. Like, who do you think is very underrated now, from who you came across, or maybe you spoke with Irv and some other guys and just couldn't wrap your head around why this person is not
Underrated in terms of like
like,
currently or from the past? From the past.
you can say both.
Well, if we're speaking from the past, honestly, and it may sound funny to say it because we just did a whole documentary on him, but I think Ja Rule doesn't get the credit that he deserves as an artist and as a, you know, just as a superstar, because when he did what he did, it was so big, and it was so fast, and then also just all went away so fast too. So I think Ja Rule is underrated in the sense that his contributions that he's made to just music, not even just hip hop, but just music in general, I think he often gets overlooked. Today, God, I mean, who's underrated today? I can tell you who I think people are saying overrated, but
Yeah, let's do that. It's even more
no,
fun.
no.
I want
Drake.
names.
I mean, no, I think people think that Drake is overrated, but Drake does amazing work and he works really hard and he's extremely talented. So I don't think he's over. I think he's getting exactly what he deserves. Who's not getting the credit that they deserve? I mean, I don't know, man. I think you know. Also, I may be a little bit out of touch just because I'm getting up there. I'm not as, because I don't do music anymore. I'm a little bit removed. So there may be somebody on the radar that I might be missing that I might not be tracking. But I think everyone. I mean, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, those guys get the credit that they deserve.
Just even I know those guys. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, guys like I look at someone like Lil Baby.
Mhm.
I think, I mean, I don't think he's underrated though, but I think he's not reached the space that he's going to get to. But I think Lil Baby is probably one of the best artists of this current generation that's out right now. He's my favorite. But I also just think that the way that he's moving in terms of business and the way he's positioning himself as an artist, I think that he may be again, maybe not underrated, but definitely I think he hasn't reached the level that he's going to reach yet. So
Got it. So you also wrote music, you said. Like, what do you think would you done anything differently now, knowing the dynamics in the industry?
yeah, no, definitely. I when I listen to some of the music now that's out today, and I listen back to some of the records I was making 6-7 years ago, I was like, man, why didn't I just put this song out? I probably would have been successful with this, you know. Yeah, I you know, I think things could have been different. I think again, growing up and kind of coming up in the early 2000s and really studying the industry from that time, I really had got locked into this idea of doing things the way that they had been done. Going back to what I said earlier, that I kind of thought that things were just kind of fixed. Like, this is the way the music business is, the way it always will be. And I didn't really understand the disruptiveness that was going to come with the internet. And even though I had some songs that went viral, I had some songs that got played on the radio up in the Bay Area, and I had some very, very minor success. I just think that I was still kind of fixated on this idea that you needed a big machine behind you. And when things started turning, I wasn't quite as an art. I think business wise, I learned a lot about how to, promote a product, how to create product, how to get it out there because of music. But as an artist, I think my artistry got kind of stagnated because I wasn't, there's some point I was kind of I don't want to say afraid, but I wasn't really fully opening to be totally myself, you
Mm,
know. And I didn't. What I started realizing, which is why I kind of got out of the business, that I was starting to make music that sounded really good. I mean, you know, not to be biased, but I'll send you some stuff. It sounded good. It sounds like everything that was going on, but that's also the problem. It would sound like everything that was going on, and
gotcha.
it wasn't my voice. And I couldn't. It's hard for me to. It was hard for me to reconcile the two. Like it's hard for me to be, you know, this guy on a record and then go out in public or go perform, and it's like that's not who I am. I'm not that person. And so at the point when it was, you know, I was coming out of college, coming out of school, and I needed, you know, money, and music wasn't paying the bills.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, do I still want to go down this path of trying to be, you know, I don't want to be successful being something that I'm not. You know, I rather
Yeah.
fail being who I am than win being something I'm not, you know.
Ah, look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And that's when I made the moment to say, oh, you know, let me, you know, focus more on content creation and film and other things. And, you know, I have so many other interests as well, you know, just so many different interests in you know, film and politics and art and business that, you know, I'll always be an artist. That's just the way my mind works. And that, you know, not saying I'll never make music again, but um, at that time, I needed that transition because I wasn't being totally honest about who I was as an artist, and I couldn't quite find my voice, and I think that's why I ultimately made the transition out.
What are you working on right now?
I have a couple of documentaries I'm working on. Uh, I have one documentary I'm working on about the history, it ain't history, but more the evolution of women in the hip hop industry. I have another documentary I'm working on about that. I don't know when this is going to come out, but uh, maybe by the time it's released, within that time we'll have an announcement out. So it's a documentary about this really unique and special TV channel that was in Oakland called Soul Beat.
Mm.
Uh, that was a black owned TV station in Oakland, California, from the 70s to like the late 90s, and they played a lot of hip hop music. They put a lot of black owned businesses at the forefront, and so I'm doing a documentary about that. The legacy of that TV station, and it seems very small, this local TV channel that was black owned, but what people don't know is that everyone came through and had to kind of, you know, kiss the ring of the station. Jay-Z, Jay-Z,
Wow.
you know, Jay-Z
Wow.
came there in the late 90s. Eazy-E, LL Cool J, uh,
Wow.
Ice Cube, Tupac, all these big people that we now know are legends, all, you know, and we have all this footage with all these unique, you know, legendary players now. But at the time they were, well, some of these folks, LL, Easy, they were well known, but guys like Jay-Z, they wasn't even known yet. But they were all they all had to kind of touch down in Oakland, California, to see this, you know, this little black owned station. So I'm working on that. I'm working on a documentary about, for those who watch the Murder Inc. story. Uh,
Supreme.
yes. If you know Kenneth Supreme McGriff, the story of him, I'm doing a documentary with Kenneth Supreme about his court case. That was the kind of the case behind the whole trial that Irv Gotti and his brother went through. So I'm working on that. And then I just got a bunch of other stuff. I'm working on some stuff with the Rock Nation and the Sean Carter Foundation, working on the 20th anniversary of their scholarship foundation. We're doing a whole documentary about that, the scholarship that put me through college. So that's a big one. So yeah, we have just a lot of things in the works, but that's those are some of the highlights.
So all these documentaries, are they primarily as your um something that you're going to shoot and then sell, or it's more for your own interest? I'm just trying to see if it's like more the business stuff or it's more of the your artistic stuff, or like it's a combination of both.
It's both. I mean, these are all things. Well, with the Carter the Sean Carter documentary is something that is being done for the students and for the business. I don't think that we're going to put that out on any kind of platform, but still going to be special and a big thing. But the rest of them, they're all going to be shot. You're going to be shot and filmed and distributed commercially, because that's just the business. I got to make money.
Yeah.
So
how do you distribute it? Is it through? I'm guessing BET was very excited about what you've done with Murder Inc. story, right? And is
yeah.
Supreme is part of that, or it's something different?
We don't know yet. We're
Gotcha.
looking for partners for some of these projects.
Gotcha.
We were fairly successful at BET with the Murder Inc. documentary. Would love to partner with them again to distribute some of these things, but you never know. It could end up on BET, Netflix, any other place. But that's to be determined. But they will find home somewhere, and they will be seen wide.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate this story. And wishing you best of luck, man.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk to you and your audience. And I'm looking forward to coming back to promote some of these other projects we just talked about.
Well, I would love to have you back and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.